Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. What if you belong to a family of educated and accomplished individuals whose members, one by one, were being stricken by a mysterious, progressive, and debilitating disease that inevitably led to death? Yet doctors were unable to name it or pinpoint its cause. Would you go on a quest to learn the disease's origins? And if a test became available that could show whether you carried the gene for the disease, would you take it? Would you marry, knowing that you would prematurely leave your partner behind? And would you risk having children, knowing that they might inherit the disease and pass it along? That was the dilemma facing the Baxley family. And New York Times science reporter Gina Kolata has written about the courageous efforts by several members of the family to learn about the disease and stop it in its tracks. Mercies in Disguise, a story of hope, a family's genetic destiny, and the science that rescued them, has just been published by St. Martin's Press. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
How did you discover the Baxley family and what made you want to write about them?
Well, what happened was I got a phone call from a researcher at Duke University, and he said, there's this paper coming out in one of the medical journals, and it's about a young woman who had this procedure that would allow her to not have babies that had a genetic disease in her family. It was a procedure on the embryos. And he said, this is the first time it's ever been done for this type of genetic disease. And I said, well, that's interesting, but it would only be a story for me if she would talk to me. And he said, I can't put you in touch with her because of all the HIPAA regulations, those are the government privacy regulations. But he said her private doctor might be willing to because I think she wants to talk about it. So I called this young woman up, and she was articulate and compelling. And she told me her story about how there was this genetic disease in her family, and she decided that it was going to stop with her. So she had this procedure called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. It involves taking the embryos from in vitro fertilization and testing them one by one to see if they have the gene that would cause the disease and discarding the ones with the gene. So I wrote this article, and it just had one point. This is what she did, and it's debatable among ethicists and the public. Do you want to not have babies if the disease isn't even going to strike until middle age? So people wrote in, and some people said, well, thank goodness my parents didn't do that because I have this disease, but does that mean my life wasn't worth living? And other people said, well, if you could choose, why would you have a baby that is going to get this disease? Of course, it might be 50 years from now, they might have a cure. So that's all it was, like a little ethics story. And it was on page 1. It got a lot of reader response, but that's it, was one point. So I had this agent who said, this could be an interesting book. And I thought of it as sort of like an ethics book. And I said, yeah, maybe it could be. So I said, sure, I could write about the science and what they know about it and the ethics. Then I went to visit this young woman named Amanda Kalinsky and her family in South Carolina. And I realized that every sentence of that New York Times article had a backstory. It was amazing. Like I said, they had traced the disease back for 5 generations. Well, how do you trace the disease back for 5 generations if you don't even know it's there? Where did all this come from? The family was incredible, and their story, if I was trying to write fiction, I couldn't make this up. In fact, my editor said, Gina, you should write it like it's fiction, even though it's true. So I've never written this way before. It was like writing a novel. And it was what the book deserved. It can't be written like a science book, because this is a very personal, passionate story of a family that somehow, despite awful things happening, managed to find strength and hope, and actually even to sort of deal with a disease that could have destroyed anybody. And it was also a story of some very eccentric scientists and what they did.
The book centers around really 2 of the Baxleys, the first being Tim Baxley, whose father, Bill Baxley, died of this terrible disease in 1998, which is where you start. Describe the disease.
It had sort of an insidious start for everybody who got it, and it was a little bit different times. So for Bill Baxley, Tim's father, He was sort of starting to stumble a little bit, drag his feet when he walked, getting a little bit clumsy, sort of forgetting things in weird ways. Like one time the family went to pick up these big glass doors to put in their sunroom. And Bill Baxley was an engineer, and they went to pick up the big glass sheets, and Bill was sort of standing there baffled. He couldn't figure out how to put them in the car. So unlike him. The family, what is going on? And another time it was a Southern Baptist town, Bible Belt, and they had lots of traditions. And after church every Sunday, the whole family would get together at Bill Baxley and his wife's house for supper. And one day they were all sitting around the table, and he had a little package of crackers, like little saltine crackers. And he was trying to open it, and he had his hands underneath the table, and you could hear crackle, 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 crackle. He couldn't get it open. And everybody sat there sort of embarrassed, not knowing what to do, until his son Mike just calmly reached over and opened it for him. But then it got worse and worse, and pretty soon he couldn't walk, and he couldn't talk, and he was choking on his food. And he needed constant care. His wife kept him home and took care of him, but it was a neurological disorder that sort of robs you of everything gradually, and then it kills you.
And but it had similarities to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and then dissimilarities, right?
Yeah, that's what was so strange. Like the doctors didn't know what it was, and Bill Baxley's his sons took him to every doctor, even taking him down to Duke University, which was a big trip for a man who was so debilitated. And the doctors, it's like they had to say something, even if they didn't know what it was. So they all said, oh yeah, it's a combination of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And the family knew that wasn't right. In fact, Bill Baxley, before he died, like practically at his death, he nailed the final question in Jeopardy, and they said he did not have Alzheimer's. But they even had a brain biopsy done. Sure enough, 2 pathologists said, oh yeah, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It was like, we don't know what it is, so we'll just throw something out there. But the brothers were not satisfied with that. They felt they
And part of
had
it was
to
that I
know.
think 2 of them were doctors.
2 of them were doctors. Yeah. One was a lawyer and one was a dentist. And they did trace it back 5 generations. They knew it was inherited. The way they did that was one of the brothers, Mike, started calling people in the long-lost relatives, saying, sort of trying not to scare people, but saying, did anybody in the family, sort of die in an unusual way? And only when it was really clearly unusual did he mark them off as having had maybe this disease. And they got it back 5 generations. They knew it was inherited. Couldn't figure out what it was. Do you want me to tell how Tim figured it out? Or do you leave that as a mystery?
How did Tim figure it out?
Well, this is why I say I couldn't write this if it was fiction. So Tim had been sort of the black sheep of the family. Everybody was this high achiever, and he sort of rebelled. And we had a brother that was a lawyer, one that was a dentist, one was a doctor. He became a chiropractor. And one day, Tim was running with his brother Buddy, who was the beloved family doctor in town. And it was like an epiphany, like a bolt from the blue. You're going to go to medical school and become a neurologist. It was amazing. It was like a message to him. So he told Buddy, hey, I'm going to go to medical school and become a neurologist. And Buddy sort of laughed and shrugged. But he did. He went back, he figured this was a message. He took classes. He went back to medical school. He took the classes he hadn't had when he was studying to be a chiropractor. Went back, got into medical school, went through medical school, got into neurology training. So years are going by, and when all this started, his father wasn't even sick. They didn't even know there was a disease in their family. Then one night, he was sitting in his office after hours studying for his neurology board exams. And there was a question. It was like, here's a diagnosis. You tell us what the disease is. So there was this description of these 2 brothers, and they had a disease that sounded exactly like his family disease. And he didn't know what it was. He looked at the answer, and it was this very rare genetic disease called GSS. He said, that's it. That's my family disease. And it was. So this is why, you almost couldn't invent this story.
Right. And also, I mean, at his father's funeral, I mean, the first connection was he remembered something that a woman said at the funeral that, that this is Tim's father's father,
Right.
had this kind of shambling gait and, himself. And that's when there was the first inkling that it might be something.
Right. So Tim sort of was the clue here, because, or the key character, because his father's, the viewing before the funeral, his father was like a well-known guy in town. They'd even been the South Carolina Family of the Year one year. There was this long line of people waiting to pay their respects, and Tim was in the receiving line, and an older lady from a nearby town looked up at him and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I remember your father's daddy stumbling through the factory, had to hold on to the machines."
Right.
And then she sort of was gone in the line before he even got her name. And all
that was sort of the first
that was
light
it.
bulb.
Tim said, "Wait a minute. That means that my grandfather had this. This is not something that just happened to my father."
Right.
And that's what led them to think maybe it was a family disease. So Tim got it started, and Tim figured it out.
Okay. There's an interesting part where you write about the doctors, the scientist who put the whole GSS thing together. And I'm not going to go into all of it. Two of them actually won Nobel Prizes for their research.
Yes, isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Same research.
And the first one, Dr. Gajdusek, did he find that he discovered something called a slow virus? But was his main discovery that neurological diseases can be passed on or can be caught from somebody? Was that the discovery?
Yeah, it was. He wanted to be, he thought he would be famous. He was apparently brilliant, a genius. And when he was a kid, there were like 12 steps in his house, and he put the names of famous people, Pasteur and stuff, on each step, left the last one blank for himself. So he's off in New Guinea, where there's this very strange disease that nobody understands called Kuru. And these people were getting this weird symptoms and dying, and he was going to figure it out. And you can't imagine, in the 1950s, in the jungle of New Guinea with no tools, no science had not even begun to advance where it is today. And he wanted to figure this out. It was strange. It was striking women much more than men and children. What was this disease? He tried looking for infections and for poisons and for mineral deficiencies, almost anything. But then almost by chance, somebody gave him a clue. And he was trying to see if you could transmit it from the brain of one person into a mouse, and he was getting nowhere. And then another researcher by chance said to him, "It looks a lot like a disease that affects sheep called scrapie. And if you're trying to transmit that disease from the brain of one animal to another, it takes a very long time for the disease to show up. And I suggest you start with something closer to humans, like chimpanzees, and wait maybe years." So he showed that there was something infectious, and there was a collection of diseases. First he thought it'd be like all sorts of neurological diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, but it wasn't. But there was a specific collection of rare and unusual diseases that were unlike anything anybody had seen. And you could take the brain of an infected person and infect a chimpanzee, and a few years later a chimpanzee would get that disease.
Right. And then there was another doctor, Dr. Prusner, who also won a Nobel Prize, who found out that the method of transmission was through a distorted protein.
That's right.
Called a prion.
Right.
I mean, one thing that was interesting about it, when you look at the doctors and who worked on this and figured it all out, that there's a lot of ambition among research scientists.
Oh, yes.
But there is, in a sense, it's a collaborative effort that leads to these breakthroughs, that they have to, build on the work of other people and make connections.
Yeah, and in both cases, with both Prusner and Gajdusek, what happened was other people would find things that would lead or give them materials or would do something that would be the vital clue that would get them going on this. So
and you had to just sort of put the things together and also have some vision.
Right.
And that's what very interesting. We're going to have to take a short break, but we'll be back with more with Gina Kolata, author of Mercies in Disguise, after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with New York Times reporter Gina Kolata, whose latest book, Mercies in Disguise, has just been published by St. Martin's Press. So Tim Baxley read about GSS while he was studying for his neurology boards. He told his brothers Billy and Buddy, I guess by that time there was a test for the gene.
And they were sick.
And they were sick by the, okay. And they were both tested and both had the prion gene.
Right.
And Faye, who was Tim's aunt?
Yes, correct.
Okay, also had become ill. And after she died, Tim got her to agree to an autopsy, and it was found that she had had GSS as well. So here you have this poor woman, Merle, Bill's wife. She has to watch her husband and two of her sons suffer and die from the same disease. Now, Buddy, Tim's brother, who had the disease, has three children, Amanda, Luke, and Holly. Holly, who is married and very religious, decides not to take the test. Luke, at some point, takes the test. He doesn't have the gene. But Amanda discovers at age, 26, that she does have the gene. What kind of impact did that have on her?
Yeah, she said that first of all, she didn't think she had it. She just had convinced herself she would be okay. But of course, you never really know. And she was absolutely stunned, shocked. She had sent her blood off to California where they study this disease to see if she had to get the blood test. And the way that they give her the results, the way they give people the results, is they have the results in a sealed envelope. The doctor and the genetic counselor are sitting in their office in California. And they want Amanda to be in a psychiatrist's office with some support people. And they open the envelope and see the results for the first time and tell her over speakerphone what they are. So she's there in her psychiatrist's office with her mother and her boyfriend, and the doctor in California opens the envelope and says, "I'm sorry, Amanda." She screamed and told everybody to leave the room, and her psychiatrist was crying, and it took her a while. The shock was incredible. And then she called them all back in and said, "Okay, what are we going to do about this?" But she said living with this knowledge she said nothing prepares you. You think you're prepared, but you can't possibly be prepared for knowing that this is going to happen to you. And her boyfriend actually asked her to marry him the next day. He said he couldn't, after she found out, he said he couldn't just leave her like that. But she knows that he's going to have to take care of her. She saw her father, her grandfather, her uncles die of this disease. She knows exactly what it is, and so does her boyfriend, who was shocked when he first saw her father, who had the disease. And she has 3 young children now that she'd had with this pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. They do not have the gene. She said the disease stopped with me.
And that's because she and her boyfriend, who became her husband, he was an amazing boyfriend.
Yes.
To sign up for that, went through great lengths to make sure that they didn't have children who had the disease.
Right.
And just briefly describe that process.
Well, first of all, they had to save up the money, and it was over $20,000 cash, and they were not making much. He was a resident and she was a nurse, and they moved into a tiny, tiny apartment, and they were not spending any money, trying to save up money as fast as they could, because it required in vitro fertilization and a genetic test of each embryo to make sure and then they would only keep the embryos that did not have the mutated gene. And it turned out that half her embryos had the mutated gene. It was very difficult for her to realize that they had been discarded. I mean, it's very difficult to go through all that and say, here are 6 embryos and we're throwing them away. But she did not want any child of hers to have to even think about having that gene. So she ended up with twins, and then she got pregnant with another one of the embryos, which had been frozen, and she has 3 children. And she says that now she knows she's going to get the disease, and she doesn't want to have the big talk with the children one day. So she's trying to sort of keep mentioning it as they get older, sort of telling them more and more so that as they understand more and more about it. She makes a video for each of them on their birthday saying, here you are and here I am and here's what you can do and here's what's really special about you this year. But she says that she feels it like almost, first of all, she says it hardens you in a way to know you have this coming. Little things that maybe would have meant something or gotten you angry or something don't anymore because you have this big thing looming there. And she says she also feels that every day has to be special because she doesn't have that many days. So she doesn't want to just spend the day lazing around watching television or something. Every day she has to make the most of every day she has. And
So are those the mercies in disguise that come from being diagnosed?
I think the mercies in disguise are the way that a family can come together and love each other and accept love from other people in the midst of something which sounds like it would absolutely destroy and devastate someone. I got the title from Amanda's mother, Kathy, and she said, you have to listen to this song. It's by a Christian singer named Laura, and it's called Mercies in Disguise. So I went on the internet and I got it. And the refrain, which I have in here, what if trials of this life, the rain, the storms, the hardest nights, are your mercies in disguise? And that's in the song Blessings by Laura, who wrote this when her husband, Kathy told me, I think was dying of lung cancer. So I also have another little quote in the beginning, which is weird. My husband watches these movies that I can't even stand to look at. They're like guy movies, you know, all the violence and stuff. So he had this thing, I turned it on, and there is this quote from Mark Twain that started one of these typical guy movies. It was great. It said, the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And I thought, you know, that sort of encapsulates what was important for this family too. For them, they feel that first of all, they can help other people. And they can help other people by their story. Now, every family has conflicts and difficulties, and it's never easy for anybody. But they sort of, you know, in a way, they sort of bridge the gap between people who are perfectly healthy and people who aren't. They show how you can accept love and give love and be a family despite things that sound really, really difficult.
Where did you come into the story? I assume it was after Amanda had her twins?
Right. It was after she'd had her 3 children, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you had to reconstruct what had happened. You start the story where Bill, Amanda's grandfather, is sick. So you had to reconstruct that, I assume, with interviews.
You know, can I just, you know, I did a lot of interviews and I had different people tell me the same thing to see if everybody had the same story. And they pretty much did. And they had amazing memories. I mean, I would have blocked this stuff out. I honestly do. But, I just want to, where on earth is the beginning of this book? Okay, I just want to tell you, because I said I wrote it like a novel, and I went over this with them over and over 2 years, but just to make sure I got it right. But they were incredible. So if you don't mind, I'll just read a paragraph or two. Tim Baxley never even got the name of the woman who told him the story that set the horror in motion. It was a June evening in 1998, and Tim was at the head of a receiving line at a viewing the night before a funeral, his father's funeral. So, you know, like, he remembered everything.
Yeah.
The heat, the line, the old woman who came up to him and said, I remember your daddy's daddy in the factory. I don't think I could have done that. That family, you know, like you often hear Southerners have this gift for telling stories. Oh, this family did.
Yeah.
I mean, another example was Brother Mike was in charge of doing the family tree of disease, tracing it back. And he laid it all out on this really long sheet of paper. He had a little rectangle for each person. He put a little red check in the box of each person who had died mysteriously. He laid it out after the supper, after church one day, and everybody's sitting around the table, and they could see what happened. And then he said, a ray of sunlight came through the window and hit that family tree. He said it was like, there is light, there is hope.
Wow.
They found this, you know, they were the artists here.
They were really
They were
remarkable.
the poets. They are an incredible family. I'm crazy about that family.
Okay. It's a very interesting book. Was Amanda more than the others your hero, or?
No, I like them. I like them all.
Okay.
And it's hard when you're a reporter because you have to keep a distance in a way.
Right.
You know, like I always say if Amanda's mom lived near me, I'd like her to be my best friend. She's like my age and she's wonderful.
Is she alive still?
Oh yes, she is, because her
Okay.
husband was the one who had the disease.
Right.
And she was fine. I like every one of them. They're all different, but each one of them is fabulous.
Okay. It's a very interesting book and an amazing family, an amazing story, really.
Thank you.
We're out of time. I want to thank Gina Kolata for joining me. Mercies in Disguise, a story of hope, a family's genetic destiny, and the science that rescued them, has just been published by St. Martin's Press. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.